Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we are going to be discussing media coverage of domestic and sexual violence with our special guest, Natasha Senjanovic. So thank you for joining us today, Natasha.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
We are very excited to have this conversation, especially because this feels like something that people see all the time, where it's around like the media coverage of domestic and sexual violence. But we're missing some opportunities, so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. But before we do that, do you want to introduce yourself to our audience?
So, like you said, my name is Natasha Senjanovic, and very well done.
I practiced prior.
With the pronunciation. I am a journalist. I recently have stepped away from journalisming for a little bit, from reporting on gender violence, to start the podcast Women Like Sex. That is the culmination, really, in so many ways, of my reporting on gender violence. And also the newsroom and classroom training that I have created to improve said reporting, because so much, like you said, people see it all the time, but so much of it is abysmal for historic reasons, for social reasons, and so much of that reporting just perpetuates stereotypes and causes damage, causes misunderstanding. It does not raise awareness, but it also causes a lot of damage and pain to people who are already traumatized. And if you want, I can jump right in. Just, you made me think of something. I had an intern when I was a professional in residence at Syracuse University in the NPR station that belongs to Syracuse, to the Newhouse Journalism School. And she asked me, 19-year-old girl asked me, young woman, is it true that reporters have to report on what someone is wearing? And my heart just splintered into 1,000 pieces. I was like, no, they absolutely do not have to report on what someone was wearing when they were sexually assaulted. That is a choice.
Yeah. And so that being just one of the many examples of when we see domestic and sexual violence and intimate partner violence being reported in the media, is very often they report on potentially things that are harmful and perpetuate a lot of misinformation or misconceptions that we do have about these types of crimes. And we're really only solidifying some of the negative beliefs that people then have around these things, that makes mine and Amanda's job even more difficult as educators, trying to go out and educate people on, like, no, this is what it actually looks like. We're combating all of the ways that the news has often reported on these things then, or skewed the perspective of people in our communities. So now we're not even able to actually educate. We have to help unlearn things first.
Right, exactly. You hit the nail on the head. That is it. So much of it, and I don't blame people necessarily for this. We repeat patterns. We repeat what we think we know and what we take to be factual, and just the way that the news itself is packaged and presented and delivered to the public tends to repeat what has been done before. And when you're talking domestic and sexual violence, that lies at the intersection of so many misunderstandings to begin with.
And you're talking about news media that, like, they're sensationalizing things, right? Because they want it to be an exciting, even if it's tragic, like, news article, because they want people to view it and to view it again and to share it and to do all of these things, right? So sometimes it can feel like just reporting these basic facts might not be interesting, quote unquote, enough for the general public to want to consume. And so they're adding in these little bits and pieces that aren't really necessary for the story, just to try and ramp it up a little bit. And I think that ramping it up and getting away from, like, literally, these are the facts, this is what a perpetrator did, is really doing a disservice.
Yeah, very, very much so. And there's a point to which I understand that, because it's hard to write a story. We're talking about the most common, the most prevalent violent crimes on the planet, bar none. And when you're talking domestic violence, and if people don't understand the range of behaviors, and even if they do, I understand that it's hard to do a story that just says somebody belittled somebody today again, right? Every day for 5 years in a row, they did it again. That doesn't necessarily rise to the level of news. So I always tell people, well, you have to find a way to put that information in there that's going to explain things. I mean, I tend to say that I do explanatory journalism. Although if I'm doing a news story, if I'm doing even a 4 or 5 minute feature or a daily news spot, as we call them in public radio, which I didn't mention in the beginning, I'm primarily a public radio reporter. And I lost my train of thought. You can find ways to put that information in there, even if you're going to use the sensationalistic story. Now, having said that, I would shy away from the sensationalistic story unless, again, you're going to use that as a vehicle to say, all right, we do have a homicide. There's a domestic homicide, but then use that to explain that domestic homicides are 1 godzillionth of the domestic violence cases and the intimate partner violence cases in your jurisdiction, right? In your town, in your city, in your state, in the world. Again, use that as a vehicle, use that as a way to kind of like not sneak the information in, but say, we have this quote unquote news event, but we're really going to only talk about it in order to inform you on a larger scale of why this is. And the same goes for celebrity rape cases, right? People use them a lot, but then they focus a lot on, again, they focus on the wrong things. Use that as a teachable moment. Right? Use that as a teachable moment if you're going to use them at all. Alongside that, those are because they're so rare. Not that they're not that rare, but if you're talking in a town, you don't have that many domestics, right? In your town or your city, you don't have, thankfully, that many domestic homicides, but you wouldn't know it from news coverage.
Yeah.
Well, if that's all you're covering, that's all people know. And then, as I'm sure you know, then people will say, well, they'll hear that, they'll listen to that, they'll read that story, and then say, well, that's not me. Nobody actually physically threatened me, because we know that physical abuse is only a part of it. And a lot of people don't experience that. And then they say, well, that's not me. So then what I'm experiencing is just, quote unquote, a toxic relationship, or they blame themselves. So they don't seek help, or they don't find a way out, or their friends don't, or they don't see the red flags, right?
And that was going to be one of my points too with this, was that, when we are reporting on, say, a domestic homicide, that this wasn't an isolated incident within that relationship. It didn't just all of a sudden one day happen. There were probably months or years of other kinds of abuse that were taking place. Like, let's focus on that. Let's try and nip it in the bud before it gets to this point. And yes, the news is to know like the big stories that's going on, but if you can use that as an education piece to teach people that, hey, a lot of people are watching this, please know the red flags of an abusive relationship. Please know that the domestic homicide isn't the one-time thing that happened. And these are some things that you can start to look at before it gets there.
Right. It's a pattern. It's an escalation of violence. And yeah, you made me think of and I won't throw any colleagues or anyone under the bus, but there was a newspaper article that I read. It was about a murder-suicide. A man who killed his wife and child and stepchild. And the preface to the story was, we're going to be talking about a sensitive topic. If you or anyone you know has suicidal ideation. And all they did was talk about how much pain this man must have been in to do this. There was not a single mention of domestic violence, as if this happened in a vacuum. Again, as if one thing I teach is the media snap, right? Nobody snaps. That's a media invention, or an invention or an understanding of the bystanders, right? Of people who don't know, maybe a neighbor, or maybe even a family member who didn't recognize all of those years of pattern and escalating violence, to then say, well, I don't know, he just snapped, she just snapped, they just snapped.
Or it's like you'll interview the family, and they're like, well, we never saw this coming. He was always super kind around us. It's like, use that. Like, yes, abusive people were nice around you because they didn't want you to know.
Right. Or maybe you taught that abuse to that person.
Yeah.
Maybe because I won't necessarily even let when I'm editing and have the final say on a story and someone uses, well, the family said that they had, that the abuser had mental health issues. It's like, well, you can't corroborate that because of HIPAA. There's really no
Hmm.
way that a psychologist or a psychiatrist is, that anyone is going to give you that information. How do you know that you're not talking to the people who taught them that violence,
Hmm.
for whom a certain amount of violence was also normal and normalized?
And it really does a disservice to mental health in general, to people who
Yeah,
are struggling with poor mental health, or it, there are millions of people in America who struggle with their mental health and don't choose to abuse their partners.
exactly. Exactly. And statistically they are far more likely to be victims of
Hmm.
crimes than perpetrators. So yeah, it muddies the waters. And you actually said something interesting to me. You used the term abusive relationship, which I've stopped using because an advocate, I think someone who probably does a job similar to yours, asked me not to, and said that might make it seem like you're leveling the playing field. They're saying we see that a lot in court cases where they'll say the relationship was abusive as opposed to the person, as if
Hmm.
both of them. Whereas where it can happen, but most of the time, because abusers are bullies, it's very hard for, right, for bullies to get together with other bullies because they need a target, they need a
Yeah.
victim, they need someone to oppress, to control, to exert
Yeah, that's
power.
a really great point that
Hmm.
just apparently never really crossed my mind with it. Um,
Yeah. But it's also like
I'm
just,
gonna start watching that now.
yeah. But it's the importance of language, and really in journalism, like that's the thing. Like you are using your language, and whatever language you're using is going to potentially convey a message, whether it was intentional or not. So if you're not cognizant of the potential messaging that can come from the language that you're using, you might end up telling a story that reinforces a lot of the negative beliefs, even if that wasn't your intent.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I teach, that I very much try to be. I'm constantly trying to learn new terms, remove old ones out of when I'm reporting and when I'm teaching. And one of my big ones that I really don't like is violence against women and girls, or just
Mm-hmm.
violence against women, because then I will ask people when I am teaching, what's wrong with that? And they're like, I don't know necessarily, what's like that's, and no one has ever said, well, there's no perpetrator there, right? And then I'll point out, we don't say violence against people who aren't police. When there's a case of police brutality, we call it such. Took us a while to get there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe too long for it to become more widespread in reporting and in society. Um, but yeah, violence against women, like, do we slip on banana peels? Are we violence against? If you're talking male brutality,
Mm-hmm.
say that. And then I will have people say, well, that makes it sound like I'm, telling all men are bad. It's like, we have to get away from that fear
Mm-hmm.
also, because we're also not saying all police are bad.
Yeah.
Right, all police officers are bad, but if that's who the perpetrators are,
Mm-hmm.
primarily, not always, not, it doesn't mean that women can't be abusive, it doesn't mean that, that queer relationships have no abuse, that
Mm-hmm.
um but yeah, that's a really big one for me. SNAP and violence against women.
Yeah. It's one of the ones that I run to a lot, like doing my presentations too. Is like I have to even preface it with like, I'm not saying all men are bad. It's really counterproductive of me as a guy if I were to say that to you all, because then I'm making just me also look like I'm a bad person. But men do most of the violence.
Right.
So if
Right.
most of the violence is committed by men, saying men's violence against women, against children, men's violence against men, men's violence against the LGBTQ plus community, that's accurate. That is more accurate than saying, well, just violence against women, because who's doing the violence? What is doing the violence?
Again, ghosts, right?
Yeah.
Just ghosts. We're just violenced against,
Yeah.
as if it just happens. And it's not, and one thing I do say, just to go back to the SNAP, I wanted to say earlier, I am constantly telling people, reach out to experts, and that would be people like yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because and the example I use all the time, when the economy crashes, we don't just find people who work in a bank or happen to use a bank, right?
Yeah.
Like, we all have bank, most of us, not all, but who know what a bank is, to say, well, the bank's just snapped. It's like, no, you find the experts to explain exactly how we got to this financial crash. And you can do the same thing with and find the right experts, because I also think I've seen stories where there is a domestic homicide and a law enforcement official will say, well, we don't know what happened, but he just snapped. And I've seen it more often with women, like with men. He just snapped. It's like he lost control. It's like, it's not, it's the ultimate act of control. So reframe, right? Reframe all of these issues so that people don't think, again, it's like this there be dragons territory. It's like, well, we don't know what happened. He was a nice guy. She was a nice, everybody was nice. And then suddenly this thing happened. It's like, no, it's like the family of the murder suicide story. To not even mention domestic violence is to completely dismiss the kind of terror that they must have been living in before the father actually killed them.
Yeah. And it's, especially when we're in like the realm of media we are now, where it's like you have to have quick short form stories, like as quick, got to get in and out as quick as you can. The story can't be super long. It's almost like we were getting to where we wanted to be, partly with media coverage of these crimes, where like some of that information was being added in, right? We're like, well, this is a pattern of behavior. This is the experts and information on like how domestic violence can look. But because we have such short form requirements now, almost, it's, well, okay, do I shorten the story of what actually happened to this person, or do I remove the educational pieces that we were trying to put in? And it's the same thing with like just prevention work in general, is like at organizations like ours. What is the first to go? It's always prevention. So we almost have to look at how do we start getting people to understand that educational piece is equally, if not more important than some of the information in this story, so that way we're not continuing this misinformation.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And if I, in magic wand, queen of the world, I would, for example, never have a survivor in a story. One, to not re-traumatize them, but B, because you're talking about crimes that happen at this level, right, that are so pervasive. We do have experts who can explain it. We have the data. We tend not to, the other most pervasive violent crime is larceny. And we don't constantly have to focus on people who were burgled to explain it to you. We usually give you the numbers, right? We talk about crime sprees. We talk about so and so. If it rises to the level of a news story, it is because it's happened to a lot of people yet again. And again, this is, and you're going to give some really large numbers. We can do that with this. Why do we have to constantly have people, as I talk about, I want to get away from the victim-centric stories, as one survivor told me. It's like all our stories are the same, because all abuser stories, she was a survivor of intimate partner violence. It's like all abuser stories are the same. So you all just want a pity parade. You want the pity porn about us. Why don't you focus on them to find out, I was like, she's talking accountability. She didn't, she didn't use the word. She hadn't thought about it that way, but it was, and it's hard. It's very hard to talk to perpetrators because they don't want to talk to you. If it's a court case, they shouldn't talk to you. They have every right not to. So then explanatory, let's have the numbers. Let's do stories all the time in which we use the numbers to explain, because it's under everybody. It's in front of all of our eyes. We're just not connecting the dots because, Amanda, like you said, if you keep presenting it as isolated stories, as isolated incidents, it's like, okay, but it's one after another, after another, after another. And if the accepted statistic is that somebody's being sexually assaulted in this country every 60 to 90 seconds, how isolated is it? Right? The only thing that's isolated is a lot of time the survivors not knowing how common it is. Right? The most isolated tends to be the people who are most vulnerable.
I also just think of how much also good work this would do in regards to helping victims also not only feel not as alone, but also feel like they're actually going to get the help they need if they were to ever report it. If we are using the every 60 to 90 seconds somebody is sexually assaulted, that's quite a bit of people, right? There's a tremendous number of people experience a sexual assault in this country. But if that data is not coming forward, but then we do also hear the stories all the time of the women who are lying about experiencing a sexual assault, which there are some, but it's a very, very small number. But when the stories that are being presented, you see a sexual assault and you see someone lied about it, the reporting of that is so close to equal that it's almost making it seem like, well, it could be a coin flip on if they did it or not, right? But if we're introducing the statistics and the information, you'd be able to show like, well, 96% of the time when a woman says she's been sexually assaulted, she's telling the truth. So
it might even be 99.5. I don't remember if that was researchers or FBI statistics that false reporting could be as low as 0.5%. Because really, why would you come forward?
Right.
Because, I mean, and a lot of that is, and I will teach that, like the false reporting is not the problem. False denials are the problem, which does not mean that you convict someone in the court of public opinion. It doesn't mean if somebody makes an allegation, you take it as if it were true. And write that person, write about that person, about the alleged perpetrator as an actual perpetrator, right? As a convicted or confirmed perpetrator. But if the false reporting is so low, it's not who cares, because it's important to, I don't want to dismiss it entirely, but at the same time, I kind of feel like who cares? Because we don't spend as much time talking about false reporting of murder. False reporting of burglary. People are falsely accused of things all the time, and nobody really worries about that. That doesn't mean that you're not going to pick someone out of a lineup that you were like, oh, it has to be, I'm sure it was this person that my Ring camera picked up who burgled my home.
Yeah. Well, and even in any of the stories that I've read of like the false reports, I never see the information given that it's incredibly unlikely that a false report happens. And I also never see the point of false reports of sexual assault are the lowest falsely reported crimes of any crime.
Right.
The information is never given in those stories, but think of how good that would to start to shift the public opinion on false reports if every time you saw a false report story, those were two things that were coming along with it.
Right. I mean, that's exactly it, to say, like, that way you also, as a reporter, you are protecting yourself in the sense of, because you want to buffer your stories, right? When you put as much data and facts and accuracy in your stories and say, okay, I am doing a story on a false report. If you or your editor or someone deemed it was important to do so, I personally don't, but then put that in there saying, but yeah, this is very, very rare. And what you talked about before of people, if you put them on the same plane, the false reporting and the non-false reporting, and make it seem like it's a coin toss, then you have the man he's a retired police officer. He started the DV unit. He started the domestic violence unit at Nashville, in the Nashville Police Department. And he now educates law enforcement officials around the country. So FBI agents, sheriffs and deputies, police, and others, and will ask them, how often do you think people falsely report? And most of them, he says, most of the time, because they'll start off his presentations that way, and people will say, oh, about 50%, which means that police, when they are answering calls, or when people do go to them for help, and we know that they do not, for the most part, right? If you're talking domestic violence, most people will seek out shelters, we'll seek out pretty much anybody but police. But with sexual violence, that means that if they are there, that the police officer you're talking to has a really good, there's a really good chance that they think you're lying. Really, really good chance that they think you're lying. And then that doesn't help anybody come forward. And it really, and I do see it as, sorry, you were going to ask me. Somebody was going to.
Oh,
sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and even if that police officer believes that what this victim is saying is a lie, what are the odds they do a good enough or thorough enough investigation anyway to gain the evidence necessary for that victim, should they want to actually press charges, to be able to make the case not end up being unfounded?
Right. No, it's there are so many problems. There's so many problems in the way that it's covered, the way that these issues are covered or not covered. and they are intricately tied to society. I mean, journalists are a product of society just as much as police officers are, just as much as prosecutors and judges are. And if you have these unchecked biases, as I always say, our biggest enemy in journalism are our own unconscious biases. They really are. If you don't know the subject well, if you have these biases and you're doing stories that are perpetuating, like you said, I mean, I say it of I'm the Energizer Bunny of this stuff, like, that are perpetuating this instead of illuminating the public. And it's our job to illuminate. And I say this often. When I did it during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic. I did a 17-part Pulitzer Center series. I got a grant to look at how the pandemic, how COVID conditions were exacerbating domestic and sexual, mostly domestic though. Sexual was kind of hard because there were even fewer numbers, and at least with domestic violence, you could kind of you could triangulate. Calls maybe went down, but then hospital and ER visits with deep injuries, and those are the stabbings, the shootings, like had gone up. And we also knew that how much lockdowns were just a dream for an abuser, an absolute dream to have somebody locked in the house with them who had no reprieve. But when I was doing this, I started asking all of advocates, experts, people like yourselves, who fails survivors the most, because by the time they get to the criminal justice system, everyone has failed them, or so many things have failed them. And everybody kept saying friends, mentors, religious leaders, right? The people that you turn to for support. And one friend who then became the co-founder of this, of the training that we have, that's called I Wish I'd Known, which takes its name from what the head of WHYY, former head of the newsroom at Pennsylvania NPR station, God, I wish I'd known all this information during a conversation that we just had. I wish I'd known all this information when we were covering the Jerry Sandusky and Bill Cosby trials. Like, how much better and different could our coverage been? But long story long, my friend Tracy DiTomasi said, well, it's all the support systems, the friends and relatives and teachers and professors and rabbis and priests, and like, they don't know because you all, meaning me and the media, don't tell them, you don't give them, you focus on the most egregious violence and the most sensationalistic, so they don't recognize it when someone comes to them for help. And I was like, okay, all right, then we got to fix this. It's slow. It's very, very slow going because most people are so deeply set in their ways in newsrooms that they don't see the prevalence. It really takes sort of a one-on-one basis. It takes having me or someone like me in your newsroom to just wear you down. If you're an editor, to be like, okay, yeah, you want to do this story? You want to do gun violence? You know what's behind gun violence? TV most of the time. So let's do it right. And it really, to connect the dots, because so often otherwise when I pitch stories, especially as a freelancer, and I will pitch them to national editors at NPR, and often I'll hear, well, we did a DV story last month. It's like, but it's like we did nothing but report on opioids when we finally understood the scope of the problem, and we were able to shift the needle. News media was able to shift the needle from isolated incidents to a systemic problem. Yeah. Well, but it's easier when that systemic problem, when the root of that systemic problem is a bunch of people making money. I tell people, like with domestic violence, intimate partner violence, the corruption is so deep, nobody's making money. There's so much corruption, but nobody's making money off of this. Like, not in the same way, right? You don't have a big corporation that's getting people to abuse their partners and making money off of that.
Yeah. But also imagine what that would like do to also like just like public sentiment, right? Because they're forced every day. Like every day you open up whatever your choice of news is, and you just see domestic violence case. Next day, different domestic violence case. Next day, different domestic violence case. Like eventually you get to the point where you're either like, okay, this is actually genuinely a real problem. This is happening way more often than I thought, because it's not the one story a month that you get.
Right. And the one poor person who's just in a really crappy relationship and they can't get out. And, I will tell people, like, when people ask me why I want to do this, I'm like, well, to shift so that the knee-jerk question isn't why didn't they leave, to why does someone who purports to love a partner, a child, a parent, torment and abuse them? That's the question.
Yeah.
Because asking why didn't someone leave means you've normalized the violence. You're like, somehow that's okay.
Yeah.
So why didn't the person leave the violence? Like, why are they violent?
Mm-hmm.
That too, right? It's again, it's the perpetrators that we should be focusing on.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's a much easier question for people to ask as to like, well, why didn't you do the thing to self-preserve? Why didn't you do the thing to save yourself? As to why does someone's brain think that this is an okay way to act? Why does why did
Right.
somebody grow up in a society where this violence felt like it was their right? Why did somebody choose to try and exert this power and control over another person for no reason other than they felt like they got to? You know, it's a much simpler question and it doesn't force people to like look into themselves and to look at the society that they live in and to look at how their family treats Thanksgiving dinner and, but we got to push for those questions, right? People need to take that deeper look or things are never going to change.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Once I started studying and doing more and more reporting on this, I had to question myself as well.
Hmm.
I was like, have I done this? And I would ask like a
Mm-hmm.
previous partner, did this, like once you understand the mechanisms, like, oh, again, it's not someone just snapping or exploding. It's not, and another word that I don't want people to ever use is monsters, right? These people aren't monsters.
Yeah.
The behavior might be monstrous, but monsters have like, I don't know, 15 eyes or three arms coming out of their heads. They're easy to recognize.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
So if they weren't easy to recognize, if they were able to fool people, then they're not monsters. They're one of us, right? They're a parent, a relative, a neighbor. But you should always be, yeah, you should always be questioning your own behavior once you understand the dynamics. But to get people to understand the dynamics, you have to do more stories.
Mm-hmm.
But as for the like, why didn't somebody leave? I will tell people, strangers and friends alike, I'm like, listen, I mean, especially with friends, if I know someone like you complained about your workplace for 5 years before you left, why didn't you leave? Right? There's nobody, you didn't have necessarily an
Yeah.
abusive boss. You just didn't like her, or the work wore you down. It's like it takes strength to be strong.
Mm-hmm.
It takes strength to be strong. So think about all the, or even just kind of like meh relationships. How many attempts did people take, to like we talk about, even though I've never been able to find the source of the statistic, that it takes 7 attempts to leave an abuser.
Mm-hmm.
That's not surprising because it takes even a non-abuser, it takes many, many attempts to leave a relationship for most people. It's
Yeah.
hard.
It's
And the
it,
longer you've been in that relationship, the more high that number goes, right? Because
mm-hmm.
you're thinking, okay, I've invested 5 years of my life into this relationship. I am either going to throw that down the drain by hitting the road, or I can try and make it work more. I can try and make it work more. And we have this view in society that just perpetuates that as well. Like, oh, people just don't, nobody's married for 65 years anymore, like grandma and grandpa were. They worked through their problems. No, grandma didn't have a choice. Like,
Right.
that's
Right.
why they stayed together was because grandma didn't have another option. She had 6 kids, no job, and no place else to go.
And couldn't get a credit card or a bank account in her own
Yeah.
name. That's a
Ex
70s thing, right? That didn't
right.
happen in the 18, 17,
Yeah.
1600s for women in this country. That
Yeah.
happened after I was born.
Yep. Women weren't even allowed to own property on their own, right? So, like, how can you expect that somebody would be able to just get out of a relationship like that? And this is something that I say too, which my soapbox here, when people are saying, like, oh, women today aren't like our grandmas were, that's because our grandmas told us, don't fall into this pattern. You have choices, you have options. Go to school, get an education, get a job, get your own place, and don't be reliant on a man. All of our
Mm-hmm.
grandmas, while they were still having to make grandpa's plate because he couldn't get off the couch to go make it himself, were in the kitchen telling us this. So, think about that.
Yeah, it's again, even that, it's not an isolated incident. It's not that we were just born in a certain from the 70s, 80s, 90s on or whatever, just thinking like, oh, I need to be emancipated. I need to do this. It's a progression.
Yeah.
Which doesn't always mean that everything is linear, because we also slide back,
Mm-hmm. And
as we are seeing.
yeah.
But that we stand on the shoulders of some pretty, pretty amazing women.
Mm-hmm. And just as a quick aside for like the example I like to use for people, so for some people with like, why didn't they leave? Like, I've been a lifelong Lions fan. The Lions sucked for almost my entire life. It's only the past like 3 years where I'm like, yeah, I'm a Lions fan and we're good. Other than that, it was like every now and then there was a glimmer of hope that we could be good, and we never got there. People who are Browns fans, they've been bad forever. Jets fans, bad forever, but they still have fans.
Well, that's the thing. Emotional ties are emotional ties. And one thing that I really had to do, like the schooling that I got, was from an advocate. I can't remember who it was, but it was for a story I was doing. And this woman said, it's not that survivors want, or victims, like I try and separate like victims who are actively, or, who are still in a relationship. And I know that word can be very loaded, but sometimes, especially if I have a minute and a half story, to kind of separate from trying to explain that somebody's out and somebody's still in, or, when they were still in, or, and there are also so many synonyms I can use, but
Right.
that like most survivors, most people who are with an abuser don't want the relationship to end. They want the violence to end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, no, but that's because maybe they've just been kind of brainwashed by the abuser. They're like, no, don't put words in the mouths of people who already are not allowed to speak for themselves. A lot of people want the violence to end. And I thought about, children of abusers. I thought about how many times, like, they don't stop loving their parents. They don't want, they want the abuse to end. They want the violence to end.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh my God, yeah. And really then had to watch myself to not exert the same kind of, in a sense, power and control. It was like, oh, I know better than you. It's like, no, I don't. No, I don't. So I just need to shut up and listen. And, to do that as humbly. And that reminds me of when I do go and interview survivors. Again, I will not speak to anybody who's in active crisis, especially, I mean, I wouldn't have done that anyway, but when I had women I was interviewing at the very beginning of my, let's say, GV, my gender-based violence reporting career, who said, how many times they get calls from news organizations, usually TV, or like, can you find someone who can cry on camera for us? And I was just like, that's never going to happen. I will never, ever do that. I do not want. I've used somebody crying, and it was for a workplace abuse story. And I went back and forth and even asked the person, is it okay to use this? And it was the only time. But to also, when I talk to them, when I interview them, to make sure that they have a support person with them, to make sure that it's 2 against 1, because I do not want them to answer questions that they don't want to answer just because they want to please me. And because I, as a journalist, come in with a tremendous amount of power and control. They have to just hand over their story to me and trust that I understand it and that I'm going to present it in the same way. And I could be one of those, like crappy reporters who like listens and then says, yes, but she was still wearing a miniskirt, right? Mm-hmm. Or like have that somehow come out. So I want them to trust me as much as possible. It's never happened that they haven't answered a question, but I really, really, really want that there. It could be a friend, it could be a caseworker, it could be anybody, to just say, so they can look each other, whether it's in person or whether we're over Zoom or just phone, they can look each other in the eye, and that second person can kind of give them the nod of like, or the shake the head, like, you don't have to do this, you don't have to answer this.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the harder things for, like, especially like in Amanda's eyes line of work too, is when we try to do events or we want to get people to come out to something. They're like, oh, well, we need a survivor speaker, because people want to see the survivor speaker. And I'm like, but why? What is our why of inviting a survivor to come and share their story? If our why is to create a space for a survivor to be able to openly share their story how they want to share it, without us trying to dictate what they can and cannot say, or have them change some of the language that they would choose to use, if we're just trying to create a space for them to have their story be heard, great. But if we're having a survivor come in to speak because we want people in the seats,
Yeah.
What makes us any different than any other abusive person? We're taking somebody whose personal story is now being used as a means just to get people to come to see this. And
I've been at some of those fundraising events and it's painful. It's painful. I just want to scoop that person up off the stage and say, you don't know, like this whole thing is wrong.
And it's like, and some of the survivors that like our organizations work with, they want to be able to do something to give back to us, right?
Yeah.
And if that's how they feel like they want to do that, that if they say to us, yes, I would love to speak at this fundraiser, awesome. They wanted to do that. We're not actively seeking out somebody who'd be like, I guess I could do that because they helped me.
Yeah.
Because they might feel like they owe us.
They feel tremendous. They do feel indebted. And I mean, I did investigative reporting that brought down the longtime executive director of the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence because of years of allegations of workplace abuse and other things. And finally, it was what ultimately the straw that broke the camel's back was not all of these people speaking out about these allegations, about this abuse to state auditors, to board members, but it was a workplace retaliation report that was confirmed by, it was an investigation that was done by the Office of Inspector General of Health and Human Services, so by federal investigators. And one thing that came up, and these are all allegations, I will say this, so nobody sue me or anything, but one thing that people talked about was the pressure to tell survivor stories at events, that they felt pressured by leadership in this organization to tell stories, and they didn't to tell their stories. A lot of them were like, we know so many people who work in victim services have come from, right, are survivors themselves, because there isn't a lot of money, because it's so much of the time it's nonprofits doing it, and there's not a lot of money, there's not funding, there's not resources. Again, the world's most prevalent violent crimes. And then they would feel pressured. And yeah, one woman, I have to think about whether or not I could even reach out and ask her as an aside when you're editing this, if it's okay to use this. But one woman said somebody had backed out, one of the speakers had backed out, so she was told, you have to go and tell your story. And she's like, no, because my story of sexual assault ended in a pregnancy and my daughter will be in the audience and she does not know, and was told, you either do it or you're fired. And
that's crazy.
It's crazy. But to go back to when I keep saying the world's most prevalent violent crimes, and we were talking about like these isolated incidents, and it's one of like, when I will ask criminal justice reporters in Nashville, and those are the numbers I know best, but also in other places, if we know that there are about 300 shootings in Nashville every year and about 100 homicides, just round, easy numbers, 10 of those homicides are domestic. They tend to be, some of them, maybe like 3 out of those 10 will be straight up, self-defense, but cleared, and but they, I'll ask them, how many individual investigations do you think Nashville police open every year? The domestic violence unit opens every year, or just police in general. And they will usually guess a couple hundred based on those numbers. And then I tell them 25 to 30,000. 25 to 30,000. So if you're covering the homicides, how are you possibly, if there are 10 homicides, thankfully only 10, but out of 30,000, is there any other issue that we cover through such a tiny, statistically tiny, almost negligible lens? Which is not to say that those deaths are negligible. They're horrifying, and they're sad, and they're tragic for so many people. But if you have 10 homicides out of, and let's say even if all 100 homicides were, right, and let's say that some of them have just been sort of miscategorized. If all 100 of those yearly homicides were domestic violence out of 30,000 cases, and some of those are repeat, right? So they're going to the same houses, they're called back, the same homes. How are you possibly, and that's what people are covering, how are you possibly giving them a sense of what is going on in their community? And community safety and public safety? And I will hear from newsrooms that do a lot of shootings and stabbings, well, we have to cover the shootings and stabbings because, it's community safety. We need to let people know. was going on in their community. It's like, what about all these other community members?
Mm-hmm.
Are they not worth the same kind of attention? Are their lives and is their safety not worth?
Yeah. Well, I love the argument too. Sorry, Amanda. Like, I love the argument too of like, well, it's for public safety purposes. It's like, if you've got 30,000 calls on domestic violence, it's like, that's kind of a public safety concern. You've got people dating people who are harming them, whether it be emotionally, socially, physically. Like, these are people being harmed still. That should be
Right.
a
It could be
public safety
roommates as
concern.
well. It could be elderly people. It could be children. It could be parents. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got, because domestic violence is a large umbrella.
Yeah.
And, you know, do they not deserve to be protected? Do they not deserve the same kind of concerns for safety? But until people start understanding the numbers, they won't do the stories and they won't understand the numbers until we have more reporters doing them and shifting coverage. And one thing before I forget, like also shifting like headlines. Headlines need to change so that it's not, there's one that I use often, man kills boyfriend over video game. It's like, no, he didn't kill him over a video game. The video game was not the reason. Or man kills woman because she called out his name in bed. It's like, how do you know? Were you there? No, you were not. So you have no way of knowing. You're already kind of alibying these people. And we in the training, I work on headlines as well, and I work on which photos to use or not use. And celebrity cases, especially if it's an athlete, or some other famous person. If it's an athlete, and I tell people, notice how many times you will see somebody in a victorious pose, right? After a goal, after a touchdown. That's the cover story. That's the cover photo that they use. It's like you're already presenting them as a winner, this person who's being accused.
It's the sports one's my biggest pet peeve, especially like if anybody was following like when Deshaun Watson's like news stories were consistently being put out, every fucking article always ends with Deshaun Watson, 2-time Pro Bowler, blah 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 blah, like all of his like accolades and success that he's had in his career. I'm like, why is that relevant to the story? So you had the opportunity. You're showing you had the opportunity to educate your audience. And instead you're choosing, let's educate them on how good of a football player Deshaun Watson was.
I have a worse one, and I cannot remember the guy's name, Jay something, and this was in Nashville. And he had been, I think the first story that they did must have just because they grabbed the police blotter and they saw that he had been arrested for aggravated assault. He, again, because the most dangerous time is, as you know, right, when somebody's leaving an abuser or the 2 years after. And he rammed his car into that of his friends whose wife was there. So she had just filed divorce papers. Can't remember his name. She's a country musician. He's a former football player. They had, because they didn't have a lot of information, so but they could have chosen to run with a very short story and say, this is all we know, right? It happened late at night,
Mm-hmm.
and then find out more information. They instead ran a really long story with all of his football stats. Everything. One of the stories that they did in ongoing coverage was a picture of him when he was in college playing. And he was an Alabama quarterback. And I don't even remember where he went to college. I know all she's like, they could have given her resume if they're going to go that
Mm-hmm.
crazy route, which doesn't, I mean, it's unprofessional, I think unethical, but then also put all her awards, put her album, put her, where did she start? How did she start? They didn't do that. And then they even went so far as to say that their son was playing college ball and give his stats, where it was just like, again, it's like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. In what world is this okay? How is this, it's just like, this is not, this without, again, you decided to dedicate all of this space
Mm-hmm.
to this, and you did it with all the wrong stats. You could have gone through, there are so many DV stats,
Yeah.
right? If you're going to go the stat route that's actually not connected to that case right there, because his football career and his fact that he was a DJ and had his own shit, like none of that is connected, or their kid stats, then talk about how homicide is the #1 killer of pregnant and postpartum people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Talk about how domestic violence is according to the to federal statistics, one of the leading causes of workplace deaths for women. You have so many other stats. But again, it's an isolated incident, right? We're just going to go for the sensationalistic. And that one is, yeah, that's one I use in training. Like, here is everything not to do, from the photo to the headline to the meat and potatoes of it as well.
Right. And well, this is something that we talked about on an earlier podcast as well. Like when, these crime shows get made, like later, years later or whatever, and they cast someone in the role for playing this person who was a serial killer or who was a person who, murdered people. They always pick a really handsome actor to play this part, right? And then all of a sudden you get, people going like, "Oh, I really like that actor and he played this role and now I think that I'm obsessed with
Ted, how about Ted Bundy? Zac Efron
Yeah.
playing Ted Bundy. It's
Yeah.
like, why do you need a sex symbol to
Yeah.
play Ted Bundy?
I literally
He was-
could not think of a single person's
Yeah.
name, so thank you for that. But like
he was sort of averagely handsome. Like I cannot picture it. Luckily, I can't picture Ted Bundy right now, but he was sort of just average, on this side of handsome.
Yeah.
Like good looking. Not great, not bad. But like, why do you need to pick a global superstar and sex symbol? And as somebody, I'm forgetting her name. I think it's Jenna Feldman. I'm not sure. Great comedian who talks about, like, she in one of her stand-up things talks about, and I'll tell you the name, and if you need to put it in because it's worth people looking her up, I'll confirm the name. How the documentary about Ted Bundy and the narrative film came out at the same time, and they glorified him, right? They glorified. It's like we have this obsession with people. And he said, like, and he was brilliant, and they couldn't find him, and he escaped authorities. Like, no, he wasn't. They just, like, they weren't looking for him. He was an average white guy. They weren't looking for him.
Yeah.
And then when we were watching that stand-up bit, and my boyfriend said something that I use all the time. He's like, it's not brilliant. Serial killers are con artists who kill you.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, we glorify them in a way. It's like, that's exactly what they are. They are gaslighters, manipulators, they're con artists who also kill you in the end, which is not to make light, again, of although, I mean, gallows humor is, sure, like, helps you survive sport.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But yeah, so I've been using it all the time when I see someone, even a friend or, stranger, because I will talk to people about this even when they don't want me to. I mean, I make friends on the street, and within 15 minutes, I'm just like, so did you know, especially now with like the podcast I'm doing, it's like, did you know that, the correct anatomy of the clitoris was only proven in 2005 and blah, blah, blah. And did you know in domestic violence? And they're just like, oh, you're a joy at parties, aren't you?
Sean and I get that
All the time. All the time. I don't think my family asks me anymore how work is going at family events.
My mother, the only time, I mean, my mother, she supports me on this, but she loves Dateline. And I was like, I don't know why you watch it, because it's always the partner. It's always the partner. Or if it's not the partner directly, the partner hired somebody. The husband hired somebody. Could have been the wife, right? Like the girlfriend, boyfriend. Like, it's always the partner. I don't know why. And they build it up and build it up. And I still haven't listened to the episode on true crime, on your episode, which I really, really want to, because I cannot listen to true crime stuff. I'm not that interested in, as much as I'm an addict of noir British crime dramas. Not American, not like British and Commonwealth, like Australian and Kiwi and all this. I watch that all the time. But I don't actually want to watch live or like real crime. But also mostly because, yeah, they build up and build up and build up all of this stuff that you can say in 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you can say like in 5, it was the partner, and then spend the next 55, if it's an hour long episode, giving all the stats that people should know and the red flags and helping with prevention.
And you hear it in the stories too, like they make them out to be like these masterminds. Like they're just like so smart. It's like abusive people don't need to be smart. Like, because here's the thing. if I'm able to point out red flags for my job for a living, right? And I can give you the exact play-by-play of how abusive people are abusive. Do you think I need to be smart to do it? Like, I've got the playbook to follow. I know what to do. Someone can just, my friends joke about it at the time, is like, oh, you're doing another presentation to teach people how to be abusive, because teaching red flags essentially teaches people also how to be abusive if you want to be abusive. But I'm like, it's not hard. It's not a hard thing to learn how to do. But abusive people, so they like the power and control wheels, like they have a perfectly good wheel. They don't need to recreate it. They just got to follow the playbook.
Again, it's that thing, like find the experts. That's why there's no snap. Like find the experts who can explain to you, even if they've never met that person or the family,
Mm-hmm.
that 99% for sure, this is how they were and this is what they did. Because it's really, really rare that they go out of that playbook. It's kind of like they're mini dictators.
Mm-hmm.
Like dictators all follow the same playbook, and dictators are just abusers on a mass scale. They do the same thing, the bowing down, counting to the infantilizing of people. They are the big father figure, mother figure, right? They're the thing, and you have to, and you will be punished. Something will, they'll berate you, if nothing else, consistently if you betray them, right? Loyalty and betrayal is at the core of it as well. You must be loyal to whom? To another person? That's bullshit, right? You should be loyal to yourself and to your instincts,
Yeah, it
but they don't
reminds
want that.
it reminds me. My wife and I just finished watching season 2 of Has Been Hotel, and it's like the whole point. It's like every time something happened, I was like, abuse tactic, abuse tactic, abuse tactic. It's like, could we talk about it in the confines of relationships like all the time, where it's like a dating relationship, but abusive people, regardless, they use the same tactics because they work.
That's that's another thing we have in common, yeah, because I will like watch TV and the same thing. I'm like, abuser, abuser. Well,
Uh-huh.
but what I do like, I have to say, that with these British shows is that they do tend to address it more.
Hmm.
Or maybe American shows are doing the same thing now. I just don't watch them. Um, but a lot more, and they will even talk about, yeah, they will more than I've ever seen in TV. But again, it's just me, and I like, and every once in a while I'll watch some kind of Marvel or Marvel adjacent thing that my boyfriend really likes. But for the most part, it's yeah, it's crime, and so DB comes up a lot, and they do.
As a lover of hour-long crime dramas, and I have been forever, things have gotten better. Like I'll see old episodes now of like a show that Law and Order SVU or something like that, and I watch an old episode and I'm like, oh my God, like what are they
Mm,
even saying? Like how can they say this? They've gotten better, but still
I
not
will
great, but they've gotten better.
I will also say I'm
right.
pretty sure like the directors of You also understood that directly. Like, oh, this our main character, our the person we're like following is abusive and really bad. So we had to figure out how we make sure that we're not justifying that this person's abusive. And I think they did a relatively good job about it. Especially that I saw like the guy who plays the main character in You is also doing like a tour apparently of like going to college campuses and talking to
Yeah.
them.
Wait, remind me what you is. Is that the
Penn
So it's
Badgley.
yeah, Penn
I was gonna
Badgley.
say that's the one. Yeah, I've heard him a couple of years ago now at this point. I haven't watched it, but a couple of years ago I saw, I don't know, maybe like some YouTube excerpt of him on Colbert or Jimmy Kimmel or something like, and talking about why he wanted to do that so that he could teach people
Mhm.
what, and like actually going in and talking about the red flags and the dynamics of abuse and abusers. And I was like, yay,
Which, yes,
go.
exactly. Use,
That's what we
if
want.
you know that you are a conventionally sexy actor that lots of people like, use that for like the benefit of the community, right?
Hmm.
Use your powers for good, not
Not
evil, not
evil.
complacency, not yeah, not the
Yeah.
status quo. Yeah, no, I was impressed. I was kind of deeply touched by that. Which doesn't mean because I also then I'm always bracing for who's the next person who's going to be, Me Too'd
Yeah.
and I'm also the person who's always ruining actors for them. Partly because in my previous life I covered the film industry and I was there, when I lived in Italy for 15 years and that's all I did. And I also ran a film festival, but it was all cinema all the time. And I would tell people when I tried 25 years ago to report on Harvey Weinstein, but I was not an investigative reporter and I was writing for the trades, and they were all like, well, it's just Harvey being Harvey. I was like, I think because they had opened up Miramax's old company, had opened up an office in Italy, Miramax Italia. And I was like, I think, again, allegedly, I am alleging. This is not like, I kind of get the idea that this office is here. Yeah, they're going to be producing movies, but also to procure drugs and women for Harvey. And they were like, well, that's just Harvey. It's like, and I didn't know how to push back enough. I was
Hmm.
young and I also didn't, like, I didn't, and how do you, and it's like, well, the casting couch is not a thing. I know we think it's a thing, but it's not actually a thing. Like, that's sex work.
Hmm.
And, that's transactional sex and it's coercion and it's at best sex work if somehow it's consensual. But when the power imbalance is there, that's very hard to justify. Or it's rape, right? It's not, to call it the casting couch is a really, really nice, clean name for forcing people to have sex for their jobs, right? For their livelihood. But yeah, and when all of the Weinstein stuff broke, it was like nothing there surprised me. The only thing I will say, nothing. I was like, I having been in the film industry and around it, all of that, and some of it may seem weird to people, like why you're meeting in hotel rooms so often. But when you're at a big festival, you don't have money to rent a hotel room and an office space, so hotels become de facto
Hmm.
offices. But like, I would tell people the only thing of the Harvey Weinstein story that surprised me was that he jacked off in a plant. Like literally, I was
Yeah.
like, okay, that's it. I haven't heard that before. Nobody's propositioned me with that. I wasn't around that. But everything else, I was propositioned a ton of times. I mean, none of that happened to me. And even one of the women that he raped propositioned me for sex in a hotel room when I was interviewing her for a movie. The difference was when I said no, she said, okay.
Hmm.
And then we moved on. It was not, I didn't want that to happen by any means. I didn't want it to be, but it ended, at least it ended there, which,
Yeah. So Natasha, we've kind of talked quite a bit about like what the media kind of does like not super great when it comes to reporting around intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and domestic violence. But what is something that they can do to kind of help swing that pendulum to the other way?
Well, I mean, a lot of things that we've talked about, right? I mean, from the headlines they choose to the subject matter to the people who they reach out to. One thing I could add is also I try and do joyous stories. I try and do stories about joy to show that people can come through this, that they are not fixed in time to what happened, that this is what happened to them is they are defined by this forever. People come out of this, people are resilient. And I think that's important because, again, and then you use those stories to throw some data in there, right? To funnel
Hmm.
some data into there to help people understand the dynamics of that relationship. Those are more victim centric
Hmm.
by definition, by default, but you can do them in ways that you can still leave people on a positive note. Like they can feel uplifted from it. And there are two that I'm thinking of. One was an audio story, and I just happened to get great audio from a woman who there's a high-end interior designer in Nashville who I assume she's still doing this. I don't know. She had a project called Renew, where because people were constantly giving her old furniture that she didn't want, she would use it for transitional housing.
Mm.
She would use it, or not for transitional housing, sorry. She would use it for people who were coming out of transitional
Okay.
housing. So usually mothers who were coming out of she worked mostly with the transitional housing and centers and the YW in Nashville to then give people a home. Like, what are your color schemes? What do you like? How many children do you have? And then would furnish the homes. And I loved that story. And even the editors were like, we keep listening to, and I ended it with, because they always leave a pot of chili. Like all the people who do this leave. They're not there when the survivors come home with their families. Like I had to turn off my GPS locator and everything for this house. Um, they want as few people to know, but really the people who do it don't meet the survivors, but they'll leave a crock pot of chili on the stove. And the woman whose house, of another house, a woman who had been through this, what she gave me the audio because they'll tape themselves or record themselves for the volunteers who work for Renew. And it's just her and her kids going, "Oh my God, chili, thank you, Santa." Like, it's a little kid going, "This is amazing." Or a story I did on, I these are both kid stories, and those are the only two kid stories, which I'm not saying get more kids in stories by any
Right.
means. But on the Family Safety Center in Nashville, which is this amazing safety center, like it's got a glass pyramid in the middle that's meant to help not just like be able to see kids. It's a playroom, massive, big building blocks and all kinds of things, but also to help with burnout for people who work there, so they can also see kids enjoying themselves. And I got to the woman who I was doing a story on. She asked me if I wanted to go back to the Family Safety Center with her kids and to be able to show, these kids are like, "Can we come back here every day? Because it looks like an upscale community center. It's a place you want to hang out." And it's a safety center, it's the one-stop shop of all of these resources for people in active trauma. So again, sorry, those both had kids in them. I'm not saying two kid
Right.
stories, but yeah, find joyous stories that show how people feel just reborn and are reborn when they come out of these situations, when they're able to put, doesn't mean that trauma's not there with them,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, but with good photos. There was one I did, and I didn't really talk to the photographer, and he took a picture. I didn't want a pity porn photo, but there's a woman with her head in her hands. She didn't want her face, but I was like, maybe the back of her head. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, it's too late. They just ran with that story, ran with that photo.
Mm-hmm.
And I even called the survivor and apologized and said, "I'm very sorry I didn't pick this photo." And she was like, "No, it's fine." I was like,
Yeah.
the whole story was about like how these two women that I was writing about, and it was how often the Hispanic communities, they're even more under, these cases are even more underreported because of the fears of ICE, right? The fears of
Mm-hmm.
deportation, of how many undocumented people there are. And so I was doing a story really on how Nashville did not corroborate with ICE, at least not then. I don't know now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
if you're going to do it, but like have joyful photos too.
yeah.
Something that,
The photos one is like one of my like pet peeve sticking points, especially because like I do a lot of work like in human trafficking too, where it's like every human trafficking article I swear has like someone in chains, or is like
yeah.
someone like locked in a basement or something somewhere. I'm like, that is such a minuscule number of victims of trafficking that you're conflating to using that image then to conflate what trafficking means. You're just misrepresenting what trafficking is. I hate it. So I'm
That's
with
that
you on
vicious cycle that
photos.
we're talking about.
Yes.
Like, that's how reporters have seen that information reported. And so, right, editors, newsrooms, and they're just going to keep doing it. Because you don't have someone who's saying, "That's not the face of human trafficking. That's not what
Mm-hmm.
human trafficking looks like. It looks like the kid next door,
Yeah.
even the adult next door," right? It's not yeah. So that is,
And
we could talk about this, but,
oh
and
yeah,
if anybody does want me to come talk to their newsrooms or classrooms, I am always available.
I will keep you posted on that one because I have an idea. Um, but it's also like, but focusing on the joyous stories too, I do like, because like it always just feels like every day, like the news that we're taking in is just so shitty that I don't even want to read the news articles every now and then, like most days, because I'm like, I don't want to read more bad news. So like having those joyous stories put in there, like, yes, you need the bad news because like it's going to
We
happen.
need to know what's happening. Yeah, we need to know what's happening. But the joy stories also do help more people come forward, because
Mm-hmm.
somebody who feels stuck and who's like, "I'm never going to get out of this. This is it, right? I don't know how to find the strength. I don't know." I'm not even talking about like the actual, the physically dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Um, situations where you could be killed, right? Or you could be seriously, seriously physically hurt. And I don't mean just with air quote, but like, just because most abuse is psychological, because most people who are with an abuser are being psychologically, financially, emotionally abused, and only sometimes physically, right? That they hear these stories, they see these stories, and they're like, "That could be me.
Mm-hmm.
That could be me. I don't have to be stuck in this," right? I can, like, we all need that. How many times have you read? It doesn't have to be, it could be a news article, it could be a book, it could see a movie or something. You're like, "Oh, this speaks to me.
Uh-huh.
This really speaks to where I am now." And especially if you're struggling, you're like, it could be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if you're really struggling, right, it could really be like, I could move out of this.
Yeah. Well, Thank you, Natasha, for joining us today. I've genuinely enjoyed this conversation. It was very fun. But before we sign out of here, is there one last thing you would like to let our audience know?
To the public, to the news consumers and the news makers who are listening, stop doing stories on how numbers going up in terms of domestic and sexual violence is a really bad thing, and it points to like bad policing or bad this or bad that, or like, I mean, unless you're talking about a lockdown and COVID, unless you're talking or war, most of the time, because these are so underreported, when you see stories like that, and I always teach journalism students, it means that the reporter doesn't understand the story because we need the numbers to go up. That sounds terrible, but because it's so underreported, we need the numbers to go up. And that will happen when people start believing survivors more. And that will happen when the media does a better job of educating the public. But yeah, it's when numbers go up, again, depending on the context, but most of the time, the vast majority of the time, that's not a bad thing. That means that people are just feel more empowered and more emboldened to come forward and report.
Yeah. I bring it up when I do a lot of human trafficking trainings, like where Amanda and I were in Michigan, and it was like Michigan's number 2 when it comes to human trafficking. Some people hear that like, oh, we have a really bad problem with it. I was like, or we're doing a really good job at reporting and recognizing it. Because if we're 2, no one wants to be 1 for 1, but if we're 2, that means we're doing better than like 98 other states when it comes to following through with reports of trafficking. So, what is the data telling you versus what do you think about first when you see that data?
Right, exactly. It's same thing. I tell people, we have all these numbers in Nashville. They're like, God, Nashville's such an outlier. I'm like, no, you actually have some amazing people that have worked really hard for decades with law enforcement and the courts and everyone to get them to really parse out the statistics. When I moved to Syracuse, I immediately wrote to the communications person of Syracuse PD here, and I was like, okay, I need these numbers. I want all of this, and like by these demographics, and by this, and by it. And they're like, we don't have that. The sheriff's deputies, right? The county has some of those, but not in such detail. I was like, oh, right. Nashville has some. Yeah. It's like, no, I get it. Okay.
Yeah. One of the things I tell my students a lot of times is that statistics can tell whatever story you want it to tell. So, when you're seeing these numbers, when you're seeing these, take it with a grain of salt, do a little logical thinking with it because I don't remember what my statistic was, like what the years on it were, but it was like 1969 to 1972 or something like that. The crime of rape went up by 60%. It's like, did 60% more rapes happen in those 3 years than have ever happened before? Absolutely not. Of course not. When we think about it that way, we can say, well, no, that doesn't sound logical. But 60% more people felt that they had a way to report it. That's what
Right.
you need to look at.
Right. And especially, and if you're doing some kind of local news story, see what legislative changes happened.
Mm-hmm.
When you're comparing, whether it was from 1 year to the next or 10 years or something, if there's a significant enough number for you to report on, find out what happened. Find out what legislative change, find out if the statute of limitations has been lifted. Find out, right? Find out if
Mm-hmm.
they've made reporting easier or if, just do some homework. But yeah, like you said, data is a slippery slope because it
Mm-hmm.
really it can tell so many stories. That's why you need to be really, I was gonna say armed. There so many terms that we use are just so violent. Bullet points, and we hit this topic, and you're armed with the truth, and like we're just so. Um, but yeah, know your information, know the information, and then it'll make everything else. It will make your reporting better, and it will help the public. All of this that I want to do for the public, and I mean, ultimately for the survivors. And I will say one thing about this is something that advocates have told me, when we do our jobs well,
Mm-hmm.
calls to hotlines go up.
Yep.
And that's what I have in the back of my mind always when I'm reporting. If I can help just at least, even just like 1 or 2 people who hear my story or read it, say, okay, that's me. I understand. I understand that this is happening to me and I understand what it is because, again, when people don't know, they don't understand, they don't see themselves. And there are very few other crimes that people don't know that they've been a subject to a crime.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know anybody who in their 30s was like, oh my God, I was burgled in my 20s when somebody broke into my house. The same way they're like, holy shit, I was sexually assaulted. Because they just, holy shit, like I was with an abuser. That person who I thought was difficult and this and that and had all these issues, or, like, and we in the media have no excuse for that.
Well, thank you again, Natasha. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast today. Before I let you go, though, if people wanted to find you on social media or anything, where could they find you?
So they can find me on Instagram. I'm Natasha. Oh my God, I've forgotten. I think it's Natasha MS. I mostly use, because of this new project I started, Women Like Sex. I'm on Facebook. I am on LinkedIn under my name, both of those, Natasha Senjanovic. And email, you can reach me at Natasha, Natasha, at WLSpod.com, which really stands for Women Like Sex Pod.com. When I first bought that, I had Natasha at womenlikesex.com, and I was like, I sound like a Russian mail order bride scam. I cannot use this email.
Wouldn't have thought of that immediately, but that makes a lot of sense.
I was like, this is going to be filtered out of people's inboxes.
Immediately to spam.
Immediately to spam. There's only one Russian name really that people know, and even though I'm not Russian, I'm from the former Yugoslavia, but it's like that we associate mail order brides with Russia, and it's like that's just yeah.
But also, I will make sure I link all of those in the show notes. So if anyone wants to get in contact with you or connect on social media, they can do that. But thank you again, Natasha.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at TouchySubsPod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and other content coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.